In a world where everyone knows everything. Yeah, right. One dad stands below everyone and yells, "I know nothing."
Please welcome.
This is the Dad Who Knows Nothing podcast.
Well, welcome everyone. This is the Dad Who Knows Nothing podcast. I'm so happy you could join me. Today we have Nathaniel Turner. Now, Nathaniel Turner is an author and a TED speaker. He's a self-described humanity propulsion engineer. He's author of several books, including a history-making book called Raising Supaman, which was all about him writing letters to his son as his son was growing up and talking about the different opportunities that his son would have. So I thought he'd be a great person to have on my podcast because as parents, we're always looking for what's best for our children, dealing with different struggles back and forth between the school systems that they're in, different goals that they have. It's always a pull and a struggle to try and get them to have the best life possible. And he's been able to be successful in that area with his son. And so thanks so much, Nathaniel, for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So one of the first questions that I always like to ask is, so where did this come from? You know, this Superman, I know that was a little while ago that you wrote this book. Mm-hmm. What happened? Tell me the story of where that came from.
All right. So the Raising Supaman, Supaman, don't get me sued. Raising Supaman is a collection of letters that I wrote. Started at writing my then 2-year-old son. And I continue to write him. So that would be inaccurate to say I stopped writing him. I wrote him until when he went off to Brazil. I took those letters and put them in a binder. And some of those letters became what is now the book. So what I was attempting to do from the very beginning is that when my wife informed me that we were expecting, I started making notes about the things that I'd want for my child. Didn't know we were having a boy or a girl, but just made notes about things I wanted. I hadn't shared those things with a child. Obviously, my child was small, but one day this 2-year-old joined me for a walk to the mailbox. And when we got to the mailbox, he says, "Hey, where's my mail?" And I turned to him and said, "You don't have any mail. And trust me, there's nothing good in the mailbox to begin with. You don't want any mail." And he said, "But Daddy, you have mail. I want mail." So we walked back across the street and I got in the car, drove to Target, picked up some greeting cards and some gift cards and started to write my son notes because he wanted mail. So I would mail him these postcards or greeting cards from the office. A few days later, I'd return home. He'd say, "Hey, Daddy, I got mail today." "Yes, I know, son. I'm the one who wrote you. But I'm not going to keep reading them to you." And he said, "Well, teach me to read." So one of the interesting things about Raising Superman is that those letters that you read are letters that help my son learn to read. And so he was a big fan of comic books. And one of those comic books was Superman. And if you remember when your children were small, there's some words that they have a hard time enunciating. And R's typically are those words. So he would say super instead of super. And so rather than make fun of him because he couldn't enunciate the R, I just say, "Hey, man, don't worry about it. You're my Superman too." And so I've been calling him Soup ever since he was 2.
So that's pretty cool how it all came together like that, and certainly neat story about how you could have those initial nice moments with your son and something that could continue to be built, and you're continuing to do that going forward. Yeah, is that one of the things that you think that men should do the moment they discover that they're going to be a father? Would you recommend that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I say to parents all the time, hindsight being 2020, to become a parent takes an enormous amount of hubris. And so what I mean is, all the time, I've never met a parent who said to me that I was prepared to be a parent. Most parents tell me there's no book, there's no manual. And I'm like, okay, that's true. But what else in life would any of us be engaged in that requires the amount of time and attention for 18 years? The recent study suggests that parents spend over $300,000 to just raise a child who's just living above poverty. What else would we do and spend $300,000 for and not have any training? but we do that as parents. So it takes an enormous amount of humor. So what I would say to new parents is that one of the things you should start with is to figure out what it is that you want for your child in the end. If the world were perfect and your child could be or do anything that you could imagine, what does that look like? Because I think too infrequently parents give up hopes and dreams for themselves, and that I guess that pattern of behavior passes down to what we expect and hope for our children.
And is this something when we talk about, planning out and trying to see what we would want for our children? Do you mean actually writing that down? Do you mean, is there something you may have called it like a life template? What is that?
So the what I can tell you what we did. So one of the things that I wanted for my son early on was I was a law student when I learned that I was going to be a father. And it was clear to me that I was not a great law student and that there was hardly any law firm that was coming to look to hire me. So my pathway was going to be extra different. I paid an enormous amount of money to attend a law school. There was no one looking for me. I had to find a book that said 500 things you can do with a law degree other than practice law. I'm like, okay, because 499 of these things, I still have some options perhaps. What I'm realizing that moment is that if I go into a different school, if my parents had been able to prepare me better as an infant, perhaps I would have done better in grade school. Perhaps I would have done better in high school. Perhaps I would have had more college offers coming out of high school. Maybe I'd have been able to go to a better school with larger endowments that didn't require me to go in debt to get a college education. Maybe I would have gone to a school where people introduce me and they say the name of the institution before they say my name. And so given that backdrop and my own childhood challenges, I said, well, what could we do for our son that would allow our son not to be positioned in the same place I'm positioned? And the first thing I thought was, hey, well, if he had gone to Harvard, if I had gone to Harvard Law School, when you introduced me today, you would have said Harvard Law grad before you said my name. So like, okay, well, let's get an application from Harvard and let's figure out what it is that Harvard is looking for. And let's start to create a template for that child before that child is born. And that became the life template.
And so, that brings up the subject of education. And, sometimes, we think about children, we think about, okay, let's get them ready. There's a basic minimum things that they need to have before they start kindergarten. And then the testing and making sure that they start hitting all these metrics begins, right? Mm-hmm. So, but by the time they begin to read, right, there's already so much that they could have learned already. But what do they have already become? What have they become already by the time they've learned to read in most cases?
Well, Aristotle famously said that, bring me a child by 7, I'll show you the man. I think if Aristotle was alive today, people would challenge him about saying man, but bring me a child by 7, I'll show you the adult. Which is to say that there's so many things that we are doing and knowingly and unknowingly doing to create the adult that we may or may not want by the age of 7. So I think that part is true. One of the challenges is that we live in a country that teaches parents consistently to outsource the responsibility of a child's education to somebody else. So for the first 5, 6, 7 years, in some cases, 8 years old in some states, a child is the sole education responsibility of a parent who has no training, no idea whatsoever about how to prepare their children. And so then the child shows up at school and we've got problems now because the child, to your point, is 8 and then maybe they can't read and other kids are now reading to learn and you've had a group of kids who are just learning to read and becomes kind of a mess. So I've been saying to families for a long time that from the moment that your child is birthed, it will be easier for you and better for your child the more stuff you know so you can help prepare your own child. And the pandemic illustrated that point even better than I could have ever done.
Yeah. And do you think reading is one of probably the most critical area where that gap exists?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I read some work by a gentleman by the name of Glenn Dolman. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but if you haven't, and he's deceased now. He runs an institute. His daughter runs an institute in Philadelphia. I want to say it's the Institute for achieved human potential or something like that. Or if you look up Glenn Doman or the Doman method, you'll easily find that. The thing that I found out about Glenn Doman, found very interesting, is that he was educating children with brain injuries so that the kids by 18 months were reading and doing high-level math problems. And I so, upon looking at the material, I thought, well, that's interesting. Like, my child has no brain injury, and yet children with brain injuries are able to do far more than most kids that I know are able to do. So why don't I just not try to recreate the wheel? Why don't I just buy his books, how to give a child encyclopedic knowledge, how to teach a baby to read, how to teach a baby math skills. And so we just use some of those books early on as sort of things to use to help our child develop, to learn to read, to be able to do math and so forth, so that when he was 3 and reported for school as a pre-kindergartner, he was already reading, he was already counting and so forth.
And do you think that it's some of the societal changes that we see today too? I mean, everything is now digital, everything is video based, everything is snippets of content, right? It's on demand. Mm-hmm. And reading is, it takes more effort. You got to read, you got to think what you're reading, you got to put the sentences together to understand the thought, you got to do all of these things instead of having it kind of be spoon fed to you, like you see on a lot of different applications that a lot of people are pretty much addicted to when they're not doing other things.
Right. I think your point is, and I'll use my word, but I think what I hear you saying is that we have to do a better job of helping young people with critical thinking. Because it's one thing to be able to read, it's another thing to be able to understand what you're reading and then interpret it, be able to share it, teach it, et cetera, to other people. So you're spot on in that there's not enough of that. My dad raised me, unbeknownst to me at the time, using the Socratic method. So when I got to law school, one of the things that I won't say good at, but one of the things I understood about law school, I was like, wow, this is all very familiar. This is my whole childhood. Anything my father wants to know, he asks you a question, and then when you answer that, then there's another question. And when you answer that, there's another question. And when you answer that, there's another question. And then there's an explanation for why did you do X, Y, Z, and what are the causes and effects of the things you do. So there's always this idea that you have to think critically. To your point, that's not something that we share or teach children today.
Yeah. And I think too, we're so concerned about testing in school and having kids meet a mark so that funding can occur and different things can occur, that we're also not giving them a lot of opportunities to kind of test out and try out different things and learn and be exposed to a lot of different things, because we're so focused on, they got to hit this mark in math, they got to hit this mark in science, and there's certain time frames that they have to do it. So how do we fix it? How do we fix education? How is that get taken care of?
Well, I think schools, states, cities, the federal government have tried a number of things. And to this date, we've tried charter schools and we tried, teacher prep programs. And there's a little bit of a initiative around pre-K. But one of the things I think we failed to do is that we've yet to equip parents to also be teachers. Every school that you walk into, there's two things that to me happen routinely, and I've yet to have anyone ever ask me this. The first thing is, I've never had a teacher ask me, not a teacher or educator of any kind, and my wife happens to be an educator, was a principal, was a guidance counselor, and now is a university administrator, she's a dean. I never had anyone ask me what were the hopes and dreams I had for my child. Nobody has ever asked me that. So the assumption is that they always know what's best for my child without ever asking me what it is I want from my own child. The second part of it is that if you and I were, we can't have children, but if you and I were living with a woman who was currently pregnant, the odds are that you and I would also attend a Lamaze class. So we have these classes about childbirth, how to breathe and eating ice chips and rubbing her back and all those things. But when the child is here, we have no instructions whatsoever. So one of the things I would love to see is that we have something very similar to Lamaze for children after childbirth, that there's a child rearing course that parents have available to them live, on demand, in person, where we can start sharing some of these tools and strategies, techniques that work so that more children can show up at school and be prepared.
Yeah, such a great point, because even I can remember, you spend those few days in the hospital after delivery, and it's kind of like, yeah, they may show you a couple things. They may show you, how to swaddle the child, different tips maybe for breastfeeding, that sort of thing. But then after those 2 days or whatever that short time frame is, and it's like in the car, out you go, out the door. And then the only thing you're really picking up then is, hopefully you have enough of a family environment where you have support from outside of just the parents, where, you get that support, you get some instruction, you get some help from others who have been there. But all they're really doing, to your point, is passing on what worked for them. And maybe they were in the situation where they didn't really know what they were doing. Absolutely. And I think all parents are in that mode where you're just like, I'm just kind of winging it. I'm kind of surviving. Absolutely. And so it's a great point. If we had, we get instruction manuals for every piece of equipment we ever have, but this child, it seems like there's a lack of support for those first few years. It's a great point.
Which is bizarre, because people have been having children forever, to think that no one has said, hey, these standard things might be useful. And to your point about the manual, I can remember having a manual to put a car seat in for a child that I had no clue what it was that I was doing. And so I think, again, you go home and my mother has these things she thinks I should do, and my grandmother was living at the time, and she'd have things that we should do. And I think, just now in this moment, I thought, okay, well, it's almost like someone who used to drive a Model T and another person who got around in a horse and buggy telling me what to do with a Tesla. Like, you can't tell me how to repair a Tesla. You were in a horse and buggy. You didn't have an engine. You now had an engine, a traditional motor engine, and now what we have is just electric. Those things, while they are all modes of transportation, they are hugely different. And so the strategies to fix the car, the tools, the techniques that are necessary are all very different. And I think that's what was missing with parenting. We need to have some kind of continuing progressive education to help parents help their children reach their full potential.
Yeah, and that kind of got me to, I was watching your TED talk about, it was entitled, "We Owe Generation Z an Apology Today." And you made a few good points on that. I don't want you to go through the whole thing again, but you made a few good points about some of the ways that people have these assumptions of Generation Z. And we're seeing that again with now the next generation, right? That everyone is just like, oh, they're this and they're that. But the reality is we're as much to blame for why they're like that. Absolutely. as they are. Absolutely. Right. And maybe even more so. So it was a great point in that TED talk.
I appreciate it. It's just the old adage of the tree and the fruit, that we are the tree. And it's an interesting thing, if we went and pulled an apple off of a tree, but we really wanted a peach, like, who are we going to be mad at? Are we mad at the apple, or are we mad that we were at the wrong tree? So I think that's the point I want to make, that it's easy to complain about what someone is or is not, but the truth is we've created them. So we really don't have a whole lot of room to be complaining about our creations.
Yeah, I think it's the old adage of every older generation is like, oh, this new generation has it too easy.
Right. Well, we do say it.
We all say it, right? And it's like, well, we've our advances in our generation have allowed the digital advancements and the things that have made everything so quick and easy for them. And now that's where their expectations are. And so now it's like they're going to have their own challenges because of that. So how do we address those challenges?
Yeah, it's like the yin and the yang, right? For everything that's good, there is the opposite to it. I tell people, you can have a word and you could say great, but the only reason that great has a meaning is because there's an antonym to great. Because otherwise we can't define great. It's like walking and saying if all we had were peaks, all roads would be flat. You have to have the other side to be able to see. So yeah, we can complain and say that life is really easy for them, but then there's the other part. Hey, our communities are different. So we don't have a chance to interact with people in the same capacity that we that we did before. The social skills, they don't get that. That's not their doing. That's our doing. We've made everything digital, and so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's kind of human nature to look at those negative things and kind of focus there sometimes. But I think all of us, it behooves all of us to kind of look at it from a glass half full kind of perspective. And yeah, there may be challenges, but look at what they may be able to accomplish that when we see things that our generation accomplished that we didn't think was possible, or maybe prior generations didn't think was possible. Right. And now what are they going to be able to accomplish with that?
Hopefully a lot. They got a lot of work.
Yeah. And there's a long line of things to address for sure.
Absolutely. So
the other aspect that I wanted to talk to you about was, you had talked about a secretary of citizenry for the country.
Yes,
what do you mean by that idea, to have that type of role in this country?
I'm glad you asked that question. So I look at the lack of civility in our nation, and I'm perplexed that we have secretaries for everything. We have a secretary for Treasury. We have a secretary of Defense. We have a secretary of Energy. But we don't have a secretary to help set the tone for what Americans are supposed to be. So then if we don't have a tone, we don't have someone to set the tone, then Americans decide for ourselves who we should be. Whether or not it actually fits with the so-called mission and vision of America, it doesn't seem to matter. And so that's what I was thinking. We need to have, particularly at this point in time, there's, I don't have to tell you, got lots of turmoil and incivility in the nation for any number of things. But I feel like sometimes that exists because we don't have anybody really providing any direction about what that looks like. In schools, kids don't have civics until they're junior year in high school. So if it's true that there's this 10,000 hours of deliberate practice one needs to become an expert at something, then how many hours have we had of being experts at being in civil or uncivil? Because we don't take a class until we're juniors in high school. So I just thought it'd be interesting if we had someone at the very top that passed down to various states. Here are the things, the standards for which Americans should uphold.
Yeah, and I think it gets to your point of, that being consistent from the home and in the school.
Yeah.
And if you can have some type of consistency there, then you'll have, these children growing up as understanding what it means to be a good citizen.
Absolutely.
I think one of the biggest things that I see is that there's that phrase, right? Agree to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
And that used to be something that people would always say, we can still be friends. But we'll agree to disagree on this one fact.
Right,
now it seems like they can't even agree to disagree. If they disagree on something, now they're at odds. It's like, I don't want to talk to you. I'm not going to be friends with you. We're not going to talk. And that's the thing that I just think has been missing lately is the inability to disagree on maybe a subject that is pretty tense, but still being able to move forward and still being able to be civil to each other.
Yeah, but maybe partially about the way how everything is socialized. Your earlier point about having an inability to think critically, I think that's certainly speaks to that issue. The ability to say to you, hey, I hear what you're saying, but I see it slightly different, but we still gonna be boys. Now let's go out and watch a game or have a drink or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the critical thought of, all right, I want to have him as a friend, regardless of whether or not we agree on all issues. In fact, there's no growth if the only person I ever spend time with is always fully in agreement with me. Like the growth comes, as I tell people, from friction. There's nothing that grows without. Babies don't grow, plants don't grow, everything has some level of friction. So, but most people don't want friction anymore.
Yeah. And I think it's also because the information sources that we we used to have that we may put a little, and maybe it was naive on our part to think that they were more trustworthy, but they definitely appeared to be more trustworthy. I mean, when I was young, the 6 o'clock news after the local news with Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather, I mean, you trusted that. You trusted that news to be factual. And now with so much media and so many different sources for people to get news, and everything's owned by corporations, so there's always slants one way or the other.
Absolutely.
That critical thinking is even more essential because you have to be, it's almost like you have to get it from one source and then compare it from another source.
Right.
And the actual story is somewhere in the middle,
Right.
and you got to piece it all together and say, all right, this is probably what the reality is.
Yeah, what's the old TV show where they used to just say, "Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts, sir"?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm like, can we just give me the facts? Today, a building burned down. Great. Don't turn it into a political discussion about what party should. I'm like, I don't want to hear all of that. But but that's where we are today with today's media and with today's news.
Yeah. So it's interesting. What I do sometimes with my daughters is they will sometimes hear different things, right? And they'll come and they'll say, "Hey, did you hear about this?" And I'm a pretty avid reader of news. I like to see, and but I want to test, to see how deep they're actually looking into it. So they'll tell me, and I'll say, "No, I didn't hear about that. What is that? What happened?" And let them kind of tell me. And it's so funny how close it literally is at a surface level of just whatever the headline was, or maybe the first sentence or two of the story. Because, and then as you go down in the story, you find out some other facts about something else. I remember my oldest came to me and she's like, I can't believe the president got impeached back when, Trump was going through that.
Right.
And we had to have a discussion, and I had to say, look, what you read was he was voted to be impeached in one side of, in the Senate or the House. I can't remember which way, but it will never pass in the other side. So he'll never be impeached.
Right.
And so just having that conversation with her got her to understand, okay, there's always going to be more that you got to dig into. So, but it's interesting how sometimes it's just that surface, wow, this is what happened. And it's like, not really. There's a little more to it.
That's the whole clickbait, right? To get us just to read something quickly and then go on to the next thing.
Yeah. So obviously a lot of great work that you're doing, helping parents, start to build out, and design this life that they want for their children. You make some really great points about, trying to get some of these things started as early as possible. I mean, because there's been facts shown that even reading to your child while they're still in the womb is beneficial, and so many things like that. But I kind of wanted to pivot too, because I know that you do a lot of work as well with your clients on helping them to have their best life, right? So I think we talked about your title, Humanity Propulsion Engineer. So where did that part come from, and how's that work going?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about that is that I'm not an engineer by trade. My son tells me all the time, I'm the real engineer. You're not Yes, sir, I understand. But there's a certain thing as a social engineer. And I would say this, I believe everybody should be a humanity propulsion engineer, which is to say, just take the 3 words. We all know what humanity is. And we know propel is to move forward. I would say move forward positively. And engineering is an ideal to come up with tools, techniques, strategies to move humanity forward positively. That's the way I look at it. And I think that's incumbent upon all of us, not just me, but I just thought, hey, it's a nice moniker, a nice way to separate yourself from the masses. I didn't want to be known as a motivational speaker. I didn't want to be known as, some inspirational guy. I just wanted to be known as a guy who understands that my purpose on the planet while I have time is to help serve and make sure other people know that their lives matter. And I do that by coming up with strategies and tools to help people propel their life and hopefully the lives of their children forward positively.
And a lot of what you're talking about is, you use the word design a lot. So backward design, using, everything by design. So what are you talking about when you're talking about by design?
Sure. So let's take education as an example. If you walk into a school and you ask the school what college, if you want your child to go to college, because all parents will say college is not for everyone. Okay. But if you walk into a school and you do want your child to attend college, if you ask the school, what college or university is your school preparing my child for? Can they tell you? My experience again is I've never met a school, except for some, I shouldn't say that. There are some very elite schools where parents pay a lot of money, but the typical public school, charter school, parochial school, etc., doesn't have that. So to me, then there is no design. I'm not getting in my car and you say, hey, let's meet. And you and I say, well, where? And we don't have a place where we're going. And so I feel like everything should be by design. So in our son's case, as I mentioned, I wrote Harvard. And the idea was to at least make sure he could meet the academic qualifications of Harvard. I can't make Harvard accept him or anyone else. They accept 3% of the people who apply. But I can make sure that he meets the requirements for a school like Harvard. So that's the way I look at it. If the world were perfect and you could have anything you wanted, just like in your car, when you put in that GPS, you know exactly where you want to go. That's by design. You're not just driving around aimlessly. You do have a target or destination intended. I think life should be very lived the same way.
So how would that be, a great example with your son, but how would someone apply that to their own life if they were, and some of your clients that you've worked with, how have you helped them design their best life?
Sure. So it would begin with asking a person if, for example, if I ask you, hey, if today was your last day, are there things you would regret having not done? And most people say yes. If I said, hey, if you wrote your obituary and it could be what you want it to be, what would you include in it? You might say, Nate, the obituary is just too morbid for me right now. I said, well, cool. Let's write your Wikipedia page as if it exists when you do your last entry. What would you like it to be? Because most of us, me included, will live day by day without giving any thought to what we want our end to look like. And I feel like now I understand this better, that we're all essentially living our obituary, we're living our eulogy, we're living our final words today because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And if tomorrow doesn't come, then the best I can hope to do today is to be on a plan that's by design to be who it is that I said I wanted to be when my time was actually up. So to answer your question is, it requires a person to make a decision for themselves what it is that they see or imagine as being their best life. And once you can determine that, then we can start moving forward to make that a reality.
So one of the techniques that you had come across and you had your son doing was journaling. Mm-hmm. And the phrase you used was journaling forward as an exercise. So can you tell my listeners what that is about?
Absolutely. So here's the interesting thing. I was a hypocrite. And because this is what parents do. We have our children do stuff that we don't do. So I was invited to speak to some prospective master's and PhD students. And during that conversation, I was sharing with them all these things that our son has done to help him academically, the foods he eats, when to exercise, when to drink green tea, all these different things. And one of the things I said is every day I ask him to affirm what he wants for his life. And we ask him to do that in a journal, but not to journal like most people do, which is to oftentimes write about things you're angry about or something that didn't go well the previous day, but to write about in your journal an event that you would really like to have happen as if it's already happened. So journaling forward. The students asked me, do you do that? And I said, no, I don't. And then I just realized, hey, man, you got to start doing that. So for the last 4 or 5 years now, I've been doing that same thing. I've been beginning each morning for the first 8 to 14 minutes. Honestly, now it's closer to 20 minutes. But I get up, I don't say anything to anyone, and I write about my life in the future as I would like it to be. And what I've learned is that there's some brain science behind it, and you've probably heard it, that humans have about 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday. And the one way to change that, or reprogram the way that we process our days, is to begin the first thing in the morning by thinking about something other than the things you've been thinking about in the past. And for me, that's just journaling about my best life.
So when you do this, are you thinking about, 3 to 5 years down the road? You thinking about next week, or does it change day to day depending on what you're focused on?
Yeah. So what I try not to do is have any expectations about what it is I'm going to write the next day. And when I get up, it'll sound hokey, but I'll hear something internal, and I'll write. Like this morning, I heard, "Hold up, wait a minute," and today's journal was "Hold up, wait a minute," and I wrote about writing this book, and it was titled "Hold Up, Wait a Minute," and it was a bestseller, and it was being used in schools, and parents were using it, and so. But when I went to bed last night, that I had no idea about anything about "Hold up, wait a minute," but I do that every day, and so the ideal is I'm writing about the things that I'm most interested in accomplishing. I like to be on the bestsellers list. I like to be considered a global public intellectual. I like to be able to help masses of people and build what we call a nano community to eradicate homelessness in this country. There are a number of things I like to do. To a question I asked you earlier, if my life was over and I was writing my final entry in my Wikipedia page, I'm thinking about the things that I want to do with my life, and each day I'm writing about those.
Got it. Well, Nate, this has been a good conversation. I feel like we could probably go on for another 2 hours just talking about different things, whether it's parenting or just trying to live your best life, because that's always it's something that I'm fascinated with, right? Because everybody's different. Everybody has different talents. And sometimes it's just getting out of our own way in our own minds to let those talents show. So appreciate your time. If you could leave my listeners with one thought, what would it be?
I would say that I would like your listeners to consider the word "who." And why who? Because for me, who is the most important word on the planet. Simon Sinek and others have us convinced that we all need to know our why. I think that is foolish to be focused on a why. Our whys change. Why do I work? I work today because it's something I've been doing for 25 years. But why did I work 27 years ago? Because I learned I was going to be a parent. I needed to be responsible and make sure I could provide for a child. Your whys change, even if you stay in the same occupation. But who you are is a whole different matter. And as I mentioned earlier, who will determine who you are for the eternity? You won't be here, but someone else is eventually going to write your obituary. They're going to speak your eulogy. They're going to write those final words on your tomb or your urn or whatever it is that your final words of testament are. And so I think it's important for us every day to be conscientious about who we want to be when our time on this planet is up.
Well, nice. Well said. And so if any of my listeners want to learn more about you, is that just good to go to nathanielaturner.com? Is that the website to reach out to you, learn about what you're doing? Okay.
Yep. In order to be up I'm in the process of finding some people right now to help me to change the website and all that. But yeah, it'll still be the same web address.
All right. Sounds good. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. So excited. Thank you so much, Nate, for joining me. This was a great conversation. This is probably the type of conversation that I envisioned always doing when I started my podcast. So I can't thank you enough for giving me a few minutes of your time and telling me about your story and your journey to doing this.
Anytime. I'm happy to help. And when we're done, send me your address so I can send you copies of the books.
All right. Sounds great. All right. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn about various topics. If you'd like to get in touch with the Dad Who Knows Nothing, connect with him at the Dad Who Knows Nothing on TikTok and Instagram, or Dad Knows Zero on Twitter. If you have a moment and you like this episode, drop us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Have a great day and enjoy your journey through this game called life.